Hey everybody, welcome back. We're going to be taking a look at some new cool stuff in Photoshop today, and that's going to be color correction, photo retouching, and photo enhancements. First, we're going to take a look at color correction, and to do that, we need to be in Photoshop, and we've got some photos to work with. What we're looking at here is a photo of my parents' dog, who has her ear bent back, and as you can see, this is a photo that's in fairly decent shape. The focus is alright, it's on her eyes. We're not getting a focus on anything else really, but that's the important part of the photo. The problem is it might be a little red for some people. So one thing that we can do here is try to cool this photo off. Now before we start getting into the specifics of how to actually color correct this photo or any photo, we're going to take a look at a couple of others that have some similar problems and what we can do to work on them. So this is a cake from a birthday, and as you can see, it's a little yellow and it's a little underexposed. That's the problem we're going to tackle with this one. Also, when we get to the retouching and enhancement part of this lesson, we're going to look at taking out a candle. Next we have this photo of my friend Erica's dog Dickens, and this one's obviously really underexposed because we've got too much light coming in the background and really no light on the actual dog here. So what we're going to do is look at how to deal with those photos in particular when you have a backlit subject and you really want the opposite. Another photo we have here is a light painting I did with that same friend Erica, and this one is obviously really warm because it was shot at night when there really isn't a whole lot of light. And so you end up getting a lot of light in your photos, or a lot of light in your red channel in your photos, which is what makes them so red and warm when it's low light. So before we go any further, let's take a look at the different channels that you have. Over here in your palettes, you can click on the fourth one, Channels, and you'll see when RGB is selected, we're looking at all of them. If I want to look at just the red, I can hit Command 3 or Control 3 on the PC. Or just click on it. And as you can see, there's a ton of light in the red channel. There's a little less light and a little more detail in the green channel, and not so much light in the blue channel, but most of the detail. So this is really handy when you're dealing with different kinds of photographs, because you know what colors are going to affect the brightness and the amount of light that's in your photo. So if I added a lot of blue to this, we'd bring out some more detail, but it would get a bit darker. Now, this is really handy when it comes to portraits. We're not going to get into that right now. Let's go back to the photo of the dog and actually start doing some real color correction. Now, this doesn't need too much, and what we can do is take a look at some of our adjustments and then just try to bring in some simple color corrections. Now, we're really only going to take a look at 3 adjustments here. One is going to be levels, another is going to be curves, and then lastly we're going to look at color balance. And we're going to start with color balance because this photo needs probably very little. And when you bring up your color balance panel, which is Control B or Command B on the Mac, then you can adjust the colors in the shadows, midtones, and highlights. This isn't very precise in terms of the adjustments you can make, and using levels and curves are definitely better options. Curves is the most precise. So you want to try to use those as much as you can. But if you're doing really minor adjustments that aren't going to take a lot of time, sometimes color balance is just easier to work with. So right now I have midtones selected, and you can see if I bring up the blue here, it starts to make the photo a little bit purple. This is cooling it off though. And there we go. The cyan is what we need. So bringing that up makes this photo a little bit more even. We start to get some of that yellow out of there. And we have a more adequate white balance. So this is really fine. I mean, this is probably sufficient for what we need to do here. But just to give you an idea of some crazier stuff we can do with color balance, we can actually start doing some cross-processing effects on this photo. So let's say I want to bring up the blues here. We'll bring up the reds and the yellows and the highlights and the greens and the shadows. Now that's really intense, so let's take it down a notch. Maybe leave these up a little bit. Now, you don't necessarily want your photo to look like this, but if you wanted to do some cool kind of vintage effects, this is a quick way to achieve them. So use color balance if you want to do that. That's a nice way to do that. We're going to take a look at doing that with curves as well. But since we want this photo to just look a little less red, we're just going to adjust these. And that's it. So that one was easy. The cake's a little bit more difficult. We're going to adjust this one with levels. Now, you also have an option here to auto-tone the photo, and this basically color balances and brightens it up or darkens it or whatever Photoshop thinks that this photo needs. It's not always accurate and it's not always helpful, but let's take a look at what it does when we use it on this photo. As you can see, it brightens it up quite a bit, a little too much in my opinion. And it also really made it a lot whiter and a little bit less yellow. So that's kind of what we're trying to achieve here. We're going to do it manually, but sometimes the automatic toning that Photoshop provides is sufficient and it can save you a lot of time. So don't bother making color adjustments of your own if it's going to be a lot faster to just have Photoshop do it for you. You can always make additional adjustments afterwards. Now I'm going to bring up levels. Again, you can find it in Image, Adjustments, Levels, or pressing Command or Control L. And levels looks like this. You'll notice something familiar here, and that's the channel selector. If you don't want to alter the entire photo's color, you can alter just a specific channel. And these are the same channels that you see over in your channels palette on the right. Now, we're not going to get into that just yet. We're going to look at what these sliders do on their own for the entire photo. This is the midtone slider, as you can see, getting brighter, getting darker in the midtones. This one's the highlights. And this will bring up your highlights by moving it to the left. And if you move the shadows slider to the right, it'll darken up the shadows. So that's basically how levels works. Alternatively, you have these brightness controls if that's all you really want to do. Bringing the black one to the right will brighten it up because you're moving the black closer to the white, and conversely the white one will make it darker because you're moving the white closer to the black. So that's really all that levels does, except for you have this nice little color dropper thing here. And this will help you white balance your photo and provide some automatic adjustments. The idea is if you have a gray card, an 18% gray card, you can use this dropper, select it in the photo, and it will automatically white balance to that gray point. We don't have that, so you can just really find a gray point in your photo, click it, and watch the magic happen. Now sometimes that magic is not exactly what you want to happen, and you'll find that it makes adjustments, and it's also making adjustments to the specific layers. As you can see, it brought up the blue quite a bit here. I'm sorry, to the channels. But it's one way of sampling a color and saying this is the midpoint gray, and I want the photo to be balanced to that point. And it can save you some time in making your corrections, and then you can just go through here and adjust them as needed. Of course, we're still a little dark. It looks a little bit better. Now, I find levels a little bit difficult to actually be precise with, so we're going to cancel out of this and take a look at doing this with curves instead. Curves is a lot easier to get better color correction, I think. And I was opposed to it at first. I always used levels when I first started out with Photoshop because it's easier to understand. But curves is a lot more powerful and a lot easier to use once you get the hang of it. So I highly recommend trying to use curves instead of levels, even if you find it uncomfortable at first. So again, you can find curves by going into Adjustments or pressing Command or Control M. Curves should look fairly familiar to you because it's not that different from the Levels panel. Now, what we're getting here is a diagonal line, basically, instead of a straight one. And when I pull this line up, let's start with the midpoint here actually. If I pull a point up by clicking and holding down and then dragging it upwards, you'll see I'm bringing up the levels in the entire photo. Now I'm bringing them up mostly at the midpoint, but it's also bringing them up over here on the high end and on the low end. But the curve is giving us an adjustment where it's brightening up the most in the midpoints, but still a little bit in the other points. It just kind of edges off as you go along. Now we'll talk about adding other points to this line, but let's take a look at what happens if I bring that point up more to the top. Now we're brightening up the highlights as well as the midpoints, or if I want to go crazy, I've got this point over here, you can see what happens when you move that line around. Now if I just want to brighten this up a little bit in the midpoints, but I also want to bring up the highlights, I can put another point here and bring those up a bit. And I can also bring up the shadows. And we do want to bring up the shadows a little bit, but the highlights, those are probably okay. So right here what we've got is a brightened up photo. And if you want to see what is actually happening, you can uncheck the preview to see what it used to look like, and now what it does look like. I'm going to bring down the shadows just a little bit more. But we still have the problem of this being a little too yellow, and that's because the photo is a bit high in the red channel. And again, we have a channel selector right up here, where you can choose red, green, and blue. Now there are a couple things that you can do here to try to combat this. Let's take a look at the red channel first. Now if you see that I'm pulling down here, it's pulling the reds out, and that's leaving blues and greens, which is not resulting in a very attractive cake. We need to figure out how much we need to pull it out. And we may not want to get it out completely. Now you see if I bring it up in the highlights, that's affecting the color of the cake a lot more. It's also bringing down the reds there. Now we don't want it in the highlights so much, but it's okay in the shadows. That's not affecting the cake so much. We can also use the blue to try to whiten up the cake a little bit. There we go. See how good that looks? Now, this is vanilla frosting and it's a little bit yellow, so it's supposed to be, but we've brought up the blues in the midpoints and used curves to kind of even them out in the other areas, and that was fairly easy to do. Now, if we go back to RGB, you can see kind of what this whole graph looks like. And you can see here that we've brought up the highlights and the midtones and a little bit in the shadows. But we've also really brought up the blue channel quite a bit. We've lightened that up a lot. So there's more light given to that color in the photo. We've also reduced the red channel because the photo was a little too red. And this is an adjustment that you'll probably find yourself making quite a bit in a lot of photos. Now, that's great. We have a nice little cake here, but let's say you want to undo that adjustment or you want to alter it later, but you can't because it's in your history and then you have to undo a whole bunch of other stuff. Well, if you want to brighten up a photo and you want to be able to adjust it later, that's what the adjustment layers are for. So you can just go into your adjustments palette, or you can go into layer, new adjustment layer, and then choose the adjustment that you want. So I'm going to take curves here, add a new curves layer, and you can see the adjustments are here, and it's added an adjustment layer right on top of the photo, and this will affect everything underneath this layer. So if I have a bunch of other layers, they'll be affected as well. Now I can use this adjustment to bring things up. We don't want to bring up the highlights necessarily on this, and now we can see Dickens' face a little bit better. That was a really easy adjustment to make. And you can see here, not only can I turn that on and off, but I can also dial down how much of an effect it has afterwards. So that's the bonus of using adjustment layers when making your corrections. It's pretty much just always better to do it that way. Sometimes I don't do it that way out of habit, but for the most part, that's what you want to do, especially because we're going to move into enhancements in this photo. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to hit Z to move to the zoom tool and zoom in on all this crap in Dickens' eye. Dickens is a sweet dog, but she gets stuff on her face and other areas a little more often than some of us would like. So the easiest way is to use a tool like the healing brush. I'm just going to right click and reduce the size of that because we don't need it. And just set in a source point, click, and let Photoshop do the hard work for you. The healing brush is great for little adjustments like this, because you can just click, option click, set a source point, click on what you don't want, and it removes it really well most of the time. Sometimes when you have edges, it gets a little weird. There, that's not too bad. So, there you go. Let's just take a look at what we did there. This is after the eye crap has been removed, and that's before. Before the eye crap, after the eye crap. Much cleaner. Next we're going to look at photo enhancements, and I didn't want to subject any of my friends to the level of torture that we're about to go through, so I figured it was only fair to use a picture of myself. This one's a little bit old and a little bit problematic for a few reasons. One, it's noisy, which you can see here. It's not that bad, but still a bit noisy because this was shot in fairly low light, using only natural light. And I also have some dry skin on my nose and some dust on my eyebrow. And it's also kind of a weird photo. Plus I have a cut on my nose. So there are a lot of little things that we could do to improve this. We're going to go over a bunch of them right here. And let's get started. Okay, so we looked at using the healing brush to remove specks and those sorts of things, so that's a really easy adjustment when it comes to this kind of crap. There we go, that's gone. And then I have some dry skin on my nose. We can get rid of that really very easily. And then this cut here. And I'm just setting source points with Option click and then painting over them with the brush. Okay, so that's the easy thing. Now, the first consideration you're going to want to make when doing a portrait is if it's going to be a color black and white portrait. We're going to work in color this time because it's harder, but I just want to show you some neat options you have. Now you can see how bad a person can look in the blue channel. That's just not an appealing picture. Green can sometimes be nice, but in this case it's just a little too detailed. And red, there's not a lot of detail in the red, which is really nice for skin. It can make your skin look really nice and smooth. So one thing we can do here, and this is a little simple technique, is select all, and then copy, and switch back to the RGB channel. We've just copied just the red channel, and I'm going to paste that on top of our current photo. And you can do things to lighten up the skin by using blending modes. Screen will probably make it a little excessive, but you can dial it back. You can also use overlay, and sometimes you can get a nice effect like that. I kind of like that. This is a little nuts. A little added contrast. There we go. Now, a lot of people are going to be upset that I'm not going to start using smart layers here, but right now I just want to work with a very simple layer set so we can look at the techniques and not necessarily organization. So we are going to look at making modifications to pretty much a single layer. So I'm going to merge these layers down by hitting Command-E, Control-E on a PC. So we just have a regular photo like this. So that helped with some of the contrast. Now, the other problem is the noise, and really, it's not that bad. What we can do really easily here is just duplicate the layer and blur the noise away. And this is also good at blurring away unwanted detail. So we're going to go to the Filters menu, this is the first time we're actually using this, and choose Gaussian Blur. Now you're going to see, since Preview is selected, this is going to update this photo and see it's blurring. Now you can't see it too much because it's just a radius of 3.2 pixels, but you can see that how much it's actually blurring. That's creepy, right there. We want to blur it more than that so you can actually see it visibly in the preview. We want to blur out that detail quite a bit. We're going to keep going. This is a high resolution photo, so it takes a little bit more to work with. Okay, so that's pretty good. I'm going to hit OK and blur that out. Now obviously this is not what we want in our photo, so I'm going to switch to the eraser tool by pressing E, and I'm going to go ahead and erase the areas where we do want detail. That's generally in the contrasty parts of the face, and if there's facial hair you generally don't want to get rid of that. And I'm going to add some detail back to the points of the hair that are in focus. Okay, so this doesn't look that great either, but it's starting to look a bit better. I'm going to dial the opacity by clicking and holding down on opacity all the way to 0, just dragging it all the way over. So this is what we started with, and now I'm going to start to bring in some of that blur. This is at 50%. And as you can see, it's blurring out quite a bit of the detail and a little bit of the noise in the background. Now the idea is you want to find something precise. Generally 15 to 20% is good to get rid of some of that detail that's just not looking all that great. Okay, so I'm going to take that, and again, you know, you don't necessarily want to be merging all your layers together, but to keep it simple for this explanation, that's what I'm going to do. I'm hitting Command-E to merge down into a single background layer. Now, we have some other things, and this is where the touch-ups come in. Now, I'm not wearing any makeup here. I'm not trying to necessarily make this photo look like I am, but you can enhance some contrast in the photo that does what very minimal makeup will do, and that can be helpful for photos. You can be a little bit more intense on certain people if you want to make it look more like there's makeup. But here are a couple things you can do with the burn and dodge tool to just kind of enhance features so they're a little bit more crisp and focused. So we've got the dodge tool and the burn tool. First, what we want to do with the with the dodge tool is enhance the midtones by just kind of removing any unwanted crap in the eyes. So I'm making a brush size that's, eye size. It's going to vary depending on the resolution of your photo. And I'm just going to brighten things up here. Now, as you can see, that was a lot, and that's because I have the exposure set to 100%. You do not want it up here. This is where I left it from the last lesson. We want to bring this down to about 10. And I'm just going to start painting the eyes a little bit and brightening them up. And this gets rid of some of the crap in the eyes because it's making it too light to see. So that's great. Another way we can do something neat while we're on the dodge tool and the midtones is kind of paint around in the colored area of the eye and brightening it up. So we're going to do that just a little bit. You're not going to see a huge difference when doing this at first, but we're brightening that up, and then we're going to switch over to the burn tool. And we need to make this nice and small, because what we're going to do here is darken the midtones around the eye. Kind of give it a little bit of a line. Now if this is looking a little intense, that's because, again, we're at 100%. So that's essentially what we're trying to do. What we need to do is dial this back, again, to about 10%, and do that same thing, but make it more subtle, because anything that you do in regards to touch-ups around the features of the face, you do not want to do too intensely. It's the same way that makeup can really actually enhance a face rather than, make it look, like someone is, I don't know, silly or perhaps a prostitute. You don't want to overdo it and make them look ridiculous. Not that all prostitutes look ridiculous, but, kind of a stereotype there. So I've brightened up the inside of the eye and darkened the outside of the eye. You can also decide to darken this dark part of the eye as well, too. Wish I could remember the names for those things right now, but I can't. And we're going to also use the burn tool to darken some other areas on the face. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger, the brush that is, and I'm going to darken up the eyebrows a little bit, just a little. And you might want to switch over to shadows at some point to add a little bit more contrast. You might find that has a greater effect for darker hair, but you want to be pulling down the midtones as well. Otherwise it's going to look too contrasty. And then you also want to do this around the nostrils so you have a nice nose line. And when you pull in this just gives a little bit more emphasis to the face. As for the lips, you want to darken up the lip line a little bit. And we're going to use the shadows for this. Let's make that a little darker. And then we can brighten up. Need to switch to the dodge tool for that. Certain parts of the lips you want to highlight, which is right there and there, in the middle kind of. Okay, so now we have done a few adjustments to the face to make it a little bit more contrasty in the areas where we want to focus. Let's take a look at what we just did. Here are all our burn and dodge effects. So I can't get back to all of them because we've done so many, but you can see it's very subtle. But there's the difference. It's just a little bit cleaner and more contrasty in a way that is actually beneficial. And so those are basic touch-ups you can do to the photo. Some other things you can do if you really want to mess with the photo and make it perhaps look a little less realistic or fake. I don't like to touch up photos beyond. I don't want to make the person look unnatural. The idea is to make them look like their best and remove stuff that just is unflattering that wouldn't necessarily always be there on their face, or to bring out certain parts of their face that are worth emphasizing. However, if you want to take it a little bit further, you can do things like use the dodge tool to brighten up areas around the eyes. Of course, whitening teeth is another thing we could do if I was actually smiling here. But you can use these tools to do a lot of different touch-ups, and it's good to explore. We're not going to get into much more than that, but those are some basic photo touch-ups and enhancements. And then you can also use your color correction stuff that we took a look at earlier to add some additional color corrections. I happen to like the color on the photo the way it is, but if you want to make some changes yourself, you have so many ways you can do it now. So start practicing with any photos that you've got lying around, or find some on Flickr or Google or whatever, and apply some of the stuff that we've done today. Tomorrow we're going to be looking at some different things that are not photo related, and those are going to be website stuff like design, layout, etc. So